Hello there and welcome back to the studio today. So we've got a lot to do today. In fact, I want to complete this underpainting for this larger portrait painting in today's episode. So on the palette here, we've got titanium white and burnt umber with our Neo McGilp medium. And what I did was I took a palette knife and I mixed up the titanium white and burnt umber and created a 9 value scale. This is actually the same day for me as when I uploaded the video about painting the neck and shoulders. Now today we're going to be painting the arms, the hands, and maybe we'll get into some more of the drapery, or maybe we'll just let that dry for the next episode or whatever. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 3 brushes. So let's get the 3 brushes. All right. So I got 3 brushes here, okay? So one brush is going to be for the light, the other is going to be for the middle tones, and then the other one is going to be for the dark. Though, to be perfectly honest, even though I'm going to have 3 brushes for this, I may just stick with 2, but we'll see. So just with the Neo McGilp medium, so I don't have to do any mixtures here, so this is just to save me a little bit or a lot of time. And I'm using the Neo McGilp just to thin out the paint and so that this dries in a relatively reasonable amount of time. Now, the fat over lean principle to oil painting states that you want to use more medium as you increase the number of layers. So after this layer dries, the next layer, actually layering over a certain area, we want to use more medium in theory. Alright, so now I'm creating a little bit of a transition. So now it's time to switch to the middle tone brush. The middle tone brush actually doesn't have that much work to do in terms of this one little area. Now I know it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing there, so I will get you into a close-up shot soon enough, but I just want you to be able to see how I'm actually going about painting in these shapes. So I make a mark, right, and I stand back. So I want to relate these planes to one another. I think that this light may be pushing it a little too much. It's a little too close to this value here. So I think, where was I? I was about here, right? I still have 1, 2, 3 more steps to go, and still look how bright it is. So that's why it's important to have the values mapped out on your palette. Now what I usually do is I mix up the value web on the palette, but I don't know, today I just felt like mixing up the values on the palette. I was just feeling a little lazy, to be honest. I didn't feel like mixing paint. Some days I'm just so lazy that I don't even mix paint. I just take the paint right off the palette and then just go from there. And that's okay, you can do that. And that just goes to show you really that you don't have to do everything the same way every time, all the time. Though you can have the fundamentals down, right? You can apply the fundamentals in however way you want. You don't have to use the classical approach. You can use a more alla prima type approach, or you can use a sandwich, like something that is sandwiched in between, and proceed from there. So now I'm putting in a little bit of a darker tone underneath of the arm. And with the underpainting, you also actually want to think about texture. What kind of texture do you want your final painting to have? Since I'm using titanium white and the Neo McGilp medium, so the application of paint isn't really that thick, because titanium white, as we know, it's a very opaque white. So, I won't really get a very thick consistency of paint. And I don't really want that thick of a consistency of paint, to be honest. And I'm just saying this for the underpainting stage. Now after standing back, I think I may have made that a little too bright actually. So let's go ahead and push this down. Yep, something about like that. All right. What I mean is that you want to think about texture in the underpainting stage, just because, the fat over lean principle, you want to use more medium as you increase in the number of layers. So suppose I really wanted a very, very thick painting. I wanted a lot of impasto type textures. Then, well, I would have done that in the underpainting. Now I could have used the flake white You know, flake white is a lead-based white, or it's lead white really, and it allows you to use more of it without raising the value too much, as opposed to titanium white. Just a little bit goes a really, really long way. So again, if you really want more texture, then go with the flake white, or if you want to use a flake white replacement, there's a lot of flake white replacements out there if you don't want to use something like lead. You know, Gamblin has its flake white replacement that's actually quite good. But the flake white that I like to use is by Williamsburg brand. Oh yeah, before I forget to mention, yeah, kind of jumped into the video today. So if you would like to know and or purchase the same type of materials that I'm using, I have Amazon links. I have affiliated Amazon links in the description box down below. So if you click on any of those links and decide to purchase the same type of materials, you know, like the burnt umber, the titanium white, some of the brushes that I have, the Neo McGill medium, Amazon will pay me a small amount. So thank you so much in advance for that. I realize I'm moving kind of quickly today. Too quickly. Slow down. We're gonna slow down a little bit. So yeah, what's the rush, right? There's no rush. So now I'm going in with a darker value underneath of the arm, and I'm sorry I still have you in that kind of far out camera shot, but since these are larger areas, okay, I think that I want you to be in that further out camera shot, just so you can see you know, the painting from a very similar vantage point as I'm seeing it. And one thing you want to take note, especially if you're, you know, like a beginner, and for me a beginner is someone that has painted under 100 portraits. I say that very lightly, okay, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a beginner. It just means that you've painted less portraits. Now anyway, you know, if you're a beginner, I would recommend highly to work with value first. So, you know, working with all of these values simplifies the task. You know, imagine having to think about exactly what color this shape was, because it's hard enough to figure out what, you know, what value that I want for this shape. And another important thing is to stand back as far as possible. You know, especially if you're a beginner. Notice my my posture, okay? I'm really, really far back. And so there's a shadow there actually that I forgot to put in when I was doing the initial drawing. So let's go ahead and put in that shadow. You know, these days I'm really thinking about Bouguereau. I'm thinking about you know, like Sir Lawrence Alma-Tadema. Hopefully I get their names right. You know, I'm thinking about more classical realist paintings. So, well, when we get to the hands, that's when I'll get you into close-up shot, just so you can see, you know, with more clarity. So that's what I'm thinking about, okay? And in the underpainting stage, you know, I'm not really trying to finish anything. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get an understanding of the values. So right now we're still in the poster image. So the poster image, just all it means is that we are prioritizing the light and dark patterns. It doesn't mean that we're only going to have two tones on the canvas. It just means that we're prioritizing, you know, the light and shadow divisions. And in terms of value, burnt umber just doesn't get as dark as ivory black, okay? And the fact that it doesn't get as dark as ivory black or ultramarine blue even, it compresses the value range, okay? So the idea is we're taking the underpainting as far as we can with a compressed value range. And what that does is if you can, you know, create a pretty convincing image with a compressed value range, the idea is once you expand on the value range, you will then open up the door to even more subtlety in your paintings. And that subtlety will be, like how close can you get the values to one another, like trying to get these transitions close to one another without losing their differentiation from one another. And what that does is it creates more nuance to your painting. And it just gives your painting much more depth. And I'm getting these brushes way confused. This at one point was the light value, and then at one point it was the middle tone. I've been confusing these brushes all around. So, you don't have to be as, precise about, if my middle tone brush gets into the dark, it's not going to be the end of the world, so. I'm just softening those edges. Now I'm going to stand back. I'm way far back. Now I see that this shape right here. Put a little more indication for the elbow with that tone. Let some of the brush strokes show through. All right, I'm going to stand back. I think that's pretty good. Now maybe I can work out this transition of value here and relate it to that. And then I'll get you into close-up shot. But see how much time this saves me? You're seeing me take directly from these values. It just really saves me a lot of time. And this is the way I go about it if you're lazy like me. And then, of course, I'm not really utilizing my dark, so I'm going to need another brush, a little more Neo McGill medium. So this dark here, I kind of lost it. There we go. We need that dark plane. Alright, how about we get you into close-up shot? Alright, so you are now in close-up shot. Just know that the camera is slightly at an angle, just so I don't, paint with the camera right in front of me. So now I'm going for these lighter planes, okay? So we're working on the phalanges, we're working on the fingers. So looking for the lighter planes. And so I'm going to bounce around back and forth between a light brush and the dark brush. I'm going to start off by locking the corner of the fingers in place. So this one right here. And it's actually nice that this dried. Remember in the first, I think the first day we started this underpainting, I was just going in with very simple outlines. It really is nice to work over top of these dry outlines. So now I'm just going to map out again where this light goes. And of course we're going to want a little plane there. So that should be middle tone brush. A little plane change there for the knuckle. On one side and on the other side. Over here. Alright, so with the dark brush, now we want to go in and map out these very simple dark shapes. I'll move up in the tone. Alright, very simple there. And remember, as I mentioned yesterday, my Patreon is now up and running, so if you would like to support me there. One of the tiers actually is the mentoring tier, so if you struggle working with hands, I struggle with working with hands. Hands, yeah, we all struggle with hands, but if you would like to send images of your artwork to me on my Patreon account, I will be able to critique. I will be able to write up constructive critiques of your artwork. Just another way to bring the experience to you. So a little bit of a lighter plane here. Now I'm in danger of subdividing these planes a little too much and then making the fingers kind of too generic, round and puffy. So rather than, you know, making them too generic, round and puffy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for these major planes. Okay, so let's go ahead and run through those planes. Darker over here. I'm going to stick with one brush for now, and I'll just be moving around the values. Now this knuckle goes a little bit lower. See how much faster we can work that way. Or if it ends up complicating the process. I don't know. We'll see. A little bit lighter over there. Now the trick with hands is to get the silhouette as correct as possible. So let's go ahead and switch brushes here. Try to put more specificity into the silhouette. A little bit darker over here. Well, yeah, so remember the hood group that I was talking about? The place where I took the other ongoing painting that we have, you know, where they have the model posing from life and such. They're actually going to have a double pose, a 6-week pose. So I'll be going there this Friday. Hopefully I'll be able to take my camera there and get some nice pictures, but hopefully, can't make any promises here, but hopefully we'll actually be able to create our first double portrait. That would be nice, wouldn't it? So we're going to put in these simple half tones here and there. Darker over here. And in the underpainting, you don't really need things such as fingernails and stuff like that, though you can put them in. It's not that necessary. A bit darker there. Now we can also start to put in some shapes for these fingers. All right. Put that shape into here. And now, of course, we need more light for these plane changes for the knuckles. We'll be making that plane a little bit brighter. A little bit darker over here. So we got a little subtle plane change. It's kind of like a wave, like down, over, down, over. But of course, it's not symmetrical. So we got to look for the nuance to these waves. So this one is much more flat, whereas this one's much more flat, whereas that one is much more angled. I suspect this one's much lighter. And of course there is a ring. We all know what the ring here means, right? But I think I'm gonna put that on afterwards, just so it looks more like the ring is actually sitting on our model's finger. Okay, so we're going to keep pushing these lights. And now I'll talk about planes. This plane is really almost non-existent, but see, there's a little indication of a half tone there, and we're just going to leave that be for now. Hopefully I didn't mess up the proportion of the hand, but I probably did. I may have widened this a little too much, but oh well. I think we'll be okay. A little darker over here. Darker relative to that, but still lighter relative to that. Darker there. I'm really getting much more comfortable with hands these days. Just the more you do something, right, the more you learn. Don't know if I learned anything extra recently, but just much more confident now with hands. Used to really struggle with them. And you know what helped me, or what I think is helping me, is the fact that I spent so long on these lines. The basic block in, I spent a long time on that. Believe it or not, like these simple lines, like the block in stage of the underpainting took me probably more time than I spent probably in any one individual area that has value. Like, by value I mean like tones, right? I spend much more time probably drawing these outlines than I am spending putting in these tones. Not saying you have to, I'm just telling you what helped me. Darker over there. Alright, so now we're going to want to put some of the halftones over here for the fingers. And probably in and out over here. Darker here. Darker here. Alright, I'm going to go in with the light tones. And the way I'm doing this is actually blurring my eyes. Right now I'm actually blurring my eyes quite a lot to put in only the most simple shapes. Because this is actually very complicated because all we have are the fingers. And we don't really have that much information for the palm of the hand, so I have to imagine the palm of the hand there. You know, one person to really look at for hands is Bouguereau. I mean, he was good at everything, but in particular hands and feet and faces and landscapes. He was good at everything. Right, putting in more light over here. So it looks like this pinky, this little pinky is actually in shadow. This little pinky's kind of shy, it's hiding away from all of these fingers. So we'll put it in shadow. No problem there. Gonna get the darker values. Darkest value right around here. That might actually take a long time to dry. I probably should have used more of my medium. The Neo McGill medium. There we go. A little bit darker over here. And put some of the little halftones underneath of the dress, or on the dress, should I say. So it's just really relaxing, to be honest. Just picking a spot and working all the shapes within that spot. Something very relaxing about that. Until I stand back and it all looks like a mess. A little bit lighter over here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and forth now between all of these shapes. I'm going to be picking and choosing areas to modify. A little more of a bright plane here for the knuckle. So there's another little plane here for that large vein. But instead of putting in the vein right away, we're going to put in the plane, and that seems to rhyme. Looks like I'm writing poetry now. Yeah, so I'm going to need to subdivide these planes even more. I want to get much more specificity. A little bit more of a half tone here. Alright, so tell you what, now it's starting to get kind of repetitive. So I'm going to continue to work on these planes in the same kind of fashion, just going back and forth between shapes. Alright, so I ended up not doing too much more for the hands. I don't really want to render any of the areas here. I don't really want to close up the forms that much. So long as the big picture, is intact, I think that I'm okay with leaving just these basic planes in that way. But as you know, I usually will do something like this. So I'm going to blur out, well, not blur out completely, but just soften these planes. Like I usually say, when you're working in layers, you want each layer, or let's just put it like this. I want the underpainting to be softer and brighter. Just because as you continue to add more layers, it's actually easier to darken and to sharpen. Okay, so now I think we're going to have to paint her knee. So her knee is right over here, so the patella is right here. So luckily, I didn't crop it right at the knee, though it would be fine if I did. But usually if you crop at a joint, like if you crop it, like at the wrist or something like that, or crop it like right at the elbow, it gives this kind of uneasiness to the composition. Not always. I mean, you can always have a much more unconventional composition. That works just fine. So let's look for the patella. So the plane for the knee, right? So there's a little kind of like a baseball plate, the thing where people slide right here. So that's what that shape actually looks like for the bone. We don't need to get into all the tendons or anything like that, but as long as we get the plane division for the patella and get the shape of the patella, we don't really need much more than that. So there, that's what I mean, the patella. And then, all these little smaller nuanced shapes aren't going to be that much more important. Now we're actually going to raise the value as we move into the half tones for the knee. A little bit more of a lighter plane here. The side of the patella. Just gonna make that a little bit lighter. And it's okay if it kind of flattens out with the dress over here. I think it'll be fine. As I said, like we can always create more nuance as we add the layers. So when we get into the local color stage, if I want to differentiate this value from this value, which I will, I most likely will, it'll be much easier. So like I said, with the underpainting, you really don't have to finish any areas per se, as long as you have the composition that you like. You block in that very basic shapes of light and dark. Focus on the the poster image, prioritizing the poster image. And remember, the poster image just means prioritizing just light and dark. Now, it doesn't mean that you must only have light and dark. It just means that you're prioritizing those light and shadow divisions. That's all. Okay, that's okay for the knee. There's a little bit of a curve up here for the clothing. So that's actually going to be, I'm going to designate that as the design, this little flowy design here of the drapery. And I really want the underpainting to be kind of warm under here, so I'm using much less of the titanium white and just kind of using the thinness of the paint. I'm going to leave some of these little marks because that's going to build what I call the awesome factor. And the awesome factor, it's hard to say that with a straight face, but the awesome factor is, I'm defining it as seeing the underpainting, glimpses of the underpainting, having that show through in the finished result. Okay, so that's pretty good for the knee. Now I'm left with the dilemma. Am I going to put in the fabrics for the drapery? I probably shouldn't. I'm thinking that I should, but that's going to get me caught up in trying to, render out certain areas, and that's just not what you need to do. For the underpainting, though you can, I think that when we get to the local color stage, I will have a color mixed up for the light and a color mixed up for the dark for this area. And with that, the underpainting stage is now complete. So I'm going to put this painting to the side, allow it to dry, and then we will start the local color stage, which will be the next stage of this classical painting technique. That being said, always remember, in a world that can be so negative, and I mean so negative, be the spark that ignites positivity amongst all of us. I really do hope that today's episode helps you out. And also, if you would like to support this channel even more, if you would like to support me even more, I now have a Patreon account where you can also support me there. I truly do hope that today's episode helps you out, and I'll see you tomorrow.